It's Mass Mutation Month. If you're not already aware, the fourth and latest set of Keyforge has been released in some parts of the world, and will be making a complete release sometime in early July. While some of us are not able to get our hands on any of the new decks quite yet, this means that we now know all the new cards that will be available in this set. So throughout the month of June, I'm going to be releasing videos taking a look at the new cards from each of the 7 houses in Mass Mutation. Now, obviously, there are going to be spoilers in this video. I know a lot of people are deciding to go into this set blind and spoiler-free, and I think that it's really awesome and it's going to be so much fun for those people when they can finally crack open their first new deck. If you're one of those people and don't want spoilers for any of the new cards, please stop watching now, because there are spoilers ahead. If you don't mind and are excited to see the new cards, then let's get right into it. I'm Keyforge Concepts, and this is our Mass Mutation Month review of House Dis. The first card we're going to start with is Dark Aember Vault, an artifact that reads after you play a mutant creature, draw a card. Each friendly mutant creature gets +2 power. This card is unique because it is actually not a Dis-exclusive card. This card can appear in any house within a deck, with the same written text and effects. As a card itself, it seems pretty strong. Getting a draw after playing a mutant from any of your houses is really good. And the +2 power is just icing on the cake. The strength of this card, of course, depends on how many mutants you have in your deck. Now, for reference, counting all of these new Dis cards, there are only 6 creatures in Dis that have the mutant tag. Now, like I already said, this card will also trigger on mutants in your other houses, but statistically you probably won't have a deck solely of mutants. This card will be powerful in some decks, and definitely lackluster in some others. The next card we have is Bonesaw, a 5-power creature that reads, if a friendly creature was destroyed this turn, Bonesaw enters play ready. First of all, love the flavor on this card. Great Randy Savage reference. As for the card itself, 5 power is great, and the potential of entering ready and trading or reaping is really good. As you'll see later in this video, Dis creatures in Mass Mutation have a lot of really strong destroyed effects, which means that having Bonesaw as a common is going to synergize greatly with what Dis is trying to do in this set. Overall seems like a solid card, and a really great card to have at common in Dis. Speaking of good destroyed effects, next up we have Brabble, a 2-power creature with the destroyed effect, your opponent loses 1 amber. If it is not your turn, your opponent loses 3 amber instead. I really like the design on this card. Now you could just trade and kill this creature on your turn for some pinch amber control if you need, but to get maximum value out of this card, you'll need for it to be destroyed on your opponent's turn. Now, unless your opponent has no amber to lose, they're probably not going to actively try to kill this creature, which can put them into some tricky spots. It dissuades your opponent from fighting or using board clears and targeting Brabble in general. So what happens if you put a powerful upgrade on Brabble? Now your opponent needs to decide if killing Brabble and losing half a key of amber is worth it, or letting them live and gain value from the upgrade that they have. Overall, I think this is a really interesting card and a really well-designed card. The next card we have is Dark Minion, a 1-power creature with 1 damage enhance, with the destroyed effect, deal 1 damage to each enemy creature. Now, for those of you who don't know how Enhance works, creatures with Enhance will give their Enhance icons to a random card in your deck, similar to the Amber Pips we see on many actions and artifacts. So in this case, 1 random card in your deck will deal 1 damage to a creature when it is played. As for the rest of the card, 1 power is really sad. This card is going to die to a slight breeze, and its destroyed effect is okay. 1 damage could be the difference between killing a threat and not, but most times I don't think it will be. It does have the potential to enable some cards that rely on creatures being already damaged, but without those cards, Dark Minion seems pretty underwhelming to me. Next up is Drecker, a 4-power minion that reads, damage dealt to Drecker's neighbors during fights is also dealt to Drecker. It also has Reap Steal 1, which is incredibly powerful. Up until now, the majority of steal effects on creatures are usually linked to an action. Now, it might seem very similar to a Reap, but the difference is not only are you gaining the stolen Aember, you're also getting the Aember from your actual Reap itself. So in reality, every time this creature reaps, you're netting yourself 2 Aember, which is incredible. The only problem is going to be keeping this creature alive. 4 power is good, but not great, but it's the passive ability that really balances this creature out. Taunts will not protect this. In fact, Drecker will probably die before the taunt beside it does. Your opponent could also just purposefully fight a weaker minion beside you, like the Brabble we just saw, and only take 2 damage while destroying both the weaker minion and Drecker itself. If you can protect this card by giving it elusive or extra power or hazardous, then it will definitely be a threat, but you'll most likely be hard pressed to keep it on board for more than a turn or 2. Next up we have Imp-losion, our first action of the set with 1 Aember Pip and the play effect destroy a friendly creature and an enemy creature. Since you get to choose which 2 creatures die, most often you should be able to work this out to your game. It also synergizes greatly with all the destroyed effects in this, and can be a quick way to detonate a powerful destroyed effect the turn it comes in. But if you use this when you have no creatures in play, do you still get to destroy an enemy creature? I suspect yes, if we follow the principle of resolving as much of a card's ability as we can. Regardless, they will probably need to put out a clarification on the ruling for this card. In summary, I think this is a solid card that synergizes really well and will play well with cards that are found in Mass Mutation discs. Next up, we have Mark of Dis, an action with 1 Aember Pip with the play effect deal 2 damage to a creature. If it is not destroyed, its controller must choose that creature's house as their active house on their next turn. I really like this card as a toned down version of cards like Control the Weak and Restringuntus. Where those cards are instant and don't really have much counterplay, this card requires active planning and it's limited even within its own application. You can't lock someone into a house if you kill the creature, and you can't lock them into a house if they don't have any creatures from that house on board. We're still getting an Aember Pip, and it still has the devastating ability to lock down a deck. It's just going to require more active setup and planning, which I think is healthy and good for the game. As a bonus, this card is also common, so with proper planning you could pull off some pretty crazy plays with 3 or 4 copies of this card in a deck. A good card and a healthy step forward for the game. Next we have Mindfire, an action with the play effect your opponent discards a random card from their hand, steal 1 Aember for each bonus icon on the discarded card. With all the enhance in Mass Mutation, this has the potential to be powerful. The maximum number of bonus icons on a card is 5 apparently, but I think most often this card will be a discard and a sometimes steal one, which is still pretty good. If I were to compare this to a card like Subtle Chain from Shadows and Worlds Collide, I think I would prefer the constant 1 Aember gain over the chance to steal one, especially if I'm playing against decks with a lot of creatures or against decks that aren't from Mass Mutation. The likelihood of the steal trigger becomes exponentially lower. The next card up is Sinder, a 6 power, 2 armor creature with Taunt and the Reap effect, destroy a friendly creature. This is a big creature, and it actually reminds me a lot of Scullion, with similar power, armor, and effects. I think I like this card better than Scullion for 2 reasons. One is because it has Taunt, which is going to force fights. The problem with Scullion was that sometimes it just wouldn't do much because your opponent just would not fight their creatures into it. The second reason is actually its Reap effect. Having the friendly creature destroyed on play with Scullion meant that it was mandatory to sack one of your own creatures to get him on board. While it was useful comboed with things like Harbinger of Doom, it usually led to a lot of clunky situations where it becomes a discard. With Sinder, while you could potentially end up destroying your line with multiple reaps, you don't actually have to reap with it. With 2 armor, Sinder seems better suited to fighting anyways, and there's no downside to fighting with this card. You also have the flexibility to choose to reap and pop one of your own destroyed effects on your other disc creatures, which is also nice. The only downside compared to Scullion is that you can't potentially do that on the turn it's played. I think this is a card that a lot of players are going to be apprehensive about at first, but will prove to be a solid staple in Mass Mutation Dis. The next card we have is Snarette, a 4-power creature that reads, at the end of your turn, capture 1. It also has the action, move each Aember from Snarette to the common supply. Now this card is the mutated version of Snarette from Call of the Archons. Now compared to Snarette, this card is a lot slower. You're only going to be capturing 1 Aember a turn compared to an instant 3 capture from Snarette. However, there are a few things about this card that make it particularly nice. The first thing is that this is going to capture 1 at the end of your turn no matter what house you play. So you can drop down a Snarette, not call this for a few turns, and it's still going to be accumulating Aember. Now obviously the strength of this card is that as an action, it can take all the Aember that it's captured and move it to the common supply, which obviously prevents your opponent from getting that Aember back. And that's incredibly important. A lot of sets and cards in the past had issues with capture just not being too impactful because the player knew eventually they were going to get that Aember back. So being a constant effect and being able to move your Aember to the common supply with this card makes it a pretty solid card and one that needs to be addressed before it gets out of control. Especially I can see this in multiple copies as a common, would absolutely wreak havoc on some people's Aember pools. Overall, very interesting design and seems like a pretty good card. The next card is Stirring Grave, in action with 1 Aember pip with the play effect archive a creature from your discard pile. Now this card I think is the spiritual successor to Exhume from previous sets. Now Exhume was an incredibly powerful card. Being able to immediately play a card from any house from your discard pile led to some crazy situations where you have a lot of really cool out-of-house combos and players just being punished for trying to get rid of their opponent's threats. Stirring Grave is obviously a little bit slower than Exhume because the creature is getting archived instead of instantly played, and you're going to have to call the creature's actual house in order to play it down if you want to on future turns anyways. So obviously not as good as Exhume, but I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think Exhume needed to be toned down a little bit, and I think this is a pretty fair way to do it. You're still able to recur any of your cards that get sent to the discard. It's just going to be a little bit slower getting them back out on board. Overall, this card isn't amazing, but I think that it's balanced for what it does. The next card we have is Waking Nightmare, an action card with 1 Aember pip that has Enhance Capture 1, as well as the play effect, keys cost +1 for each disc creature in play during your opponent's next turn. Now, keep in mind for this play effect that this will also be impacted by any disc creatures your opponent has on board as well. So the power of this card becomes exponentially greater if your opponent has house discs. Now that aside, the capture one is okay. I suppose it's nice to have 1 Aember capture within your deck somewhere, give you a little more Aember control. However, I think overall it's going to be a pretty underwhelming play effect. Disc creatures have a lot of destroyed effects, so I can imagine that there will be situations where it's hard to keep consistently 2, 3, or even 4 disc creatures on the board. If I compare this to a card like the Evil Eye from Worlds Collide, I don't think that this card is going to be giving more value than the Evil Eye is more often. It's a one-time play, it only increases the key cost for the next turn, and I think it's just going to be difficult to get the key cost increase high enough to warrant what it does. Overall, seems like a bit of a lackluster card. The 1 capture enhance is nice, but other than that, you're going to be hard-pressed really to get a lot of value out of this. The next card we have is Break Key, an action with 1 Aember pip with the play effect, if your opponent has more forged keys than you, unforge an opponent's key. If you unforge an opponent's key this way, your opponent gains 6 Aember. I am so happy that they made this card purely because it is a fixed version of Keyhammer back from Call of the Archons. Now, the problem with Keyhammer, and I speak from first-hand experience, the problem with Keyhammer is that it didn't matter if you unforged your opponent's key or not, your opponent was always going to gain 6 Aember no matter what, which makes this unsafe to play if the requirements aren't met. This means if you had a deck, say, with Wild Wormhole, or a deck where you were forced to randomly play the top card of your deck, if you accidentally play Keyhammer, you're basically giving your opponent a free key, which can absolutely throw some games, and I have absolutely lost games to poorly timed Keyhammers that were against my control. So from a design perspective, I really like this. Unforging keys is pretty unique, and outside of Keyhammer in the past, I don't think we've seen that much. So it's really interesting to see Dis's take on unforging keys. I think it's thematic for the house. It adds some good flavor there. And it's really interesting. If you can combo this with anything that increases key cost, then you can potentially gain some value out of this. Where most times if you aren't able to increase the cost of their keys, it's really just going to be setting them back a turn, which might be the difference between a won or lost game. In conclusion, I'm just happy that they fixed Keyhammer. The next card we have is Double Doom, an action card that has a play effect: return an enemy creature to its owner's hand. Your opponent discards a random card from their hand. Now the card they discarded could be the creature that you bounced back. That's usually going to be a 1 in 7 chance, so I wouldn't really count on it. Overall, this card seems just okay. Obviously, any bounce effects can be powerful against creatures that exalt, such as Worlds Collide Saurians, but you're not always going to have great options to bounce back to hand, especially if your opponent has cards with play effects. Overall, it seems okay. Doesn't really move the dial, per se, but it's okay. The next card we have is Essence Scale, an artifact with 1 Amber Pip that has the action destroy a friendly creature. If you do, ready and use a friendly creature that shares a house with the destroyed creature. Really interesting. Now note it is an action, which means you can only activate it on a dis turn. However, if you have multiple creatures of other houses, you could potentially sacrifice one of them to do some very interesting out-of-house combos. Obviously, this is going to be reliant on your creatures in your other houses, and having to have 2 creatures of the same house on board and having to sacrifice one of them is a fairly steep cost. Overall, I'm not sure if the cost is worth the effect, but I do like this card from a design standpoint. The next card we have is Grim Reminder, an action with the play effect choose a house, archive each creature of that house from your discard pile, gain 1 chain. This is another example of tuning a somewhat overpowered card from previous sets. The card in this case would be Arise, which reads very similarly, but instead the cards were going directly to your hand. This led to a lot of very crazy combos, particularly in House Dis, where you would have a board of Dis creatures, activate a bunch of their destroyed effects by killing them off or trading them into creatures, and then playing Arise and replenishing your board with all your Dis creatures on the same turn like nothing had happened. Grim Reminder is slower because those creatures are going to your archive instead of your discard, but this also leads to flexibility as well if you want to archive creatures not from House Dis. Overall, I think this is a good change for the card. It still has that room for creativity. Obviously, it's not as powerful as Arise, but I like that it leaves room for different lines of play. The next card that we have is Hystricog, a 4-power creature with enhance 3 damage and the action destroy a damaged creature. Thematically, I really like this. 3 damage enhance is nice, and the action obviously works well with those enhance icons. Now, this card itself doesn't have any damage enhance. If it did, I think that would increase the power of this card exponentially, because there would always be something to combo your action with next turn. However, because of the enhance and the way it works, you're most likely going to be relying on other cards in your deck to do this. Action Destroy a damaged creature can be very powerful if they have some big creatures that don't have armor. However, it is a bit slow since you need to play the card and then call House Dis again to make use of its action effect. Overall, I like the design of the card and I think it fits House Dis very well. The next card we have is Picaroon, a creature with variable power, which is very interesting. It has Deploy, which means it can enter anywhere in your battle line. And in this case, Picaroon's power is the combined power of Picaroon's non-changeling neighbors. Now, I assume they specified non-changeling to help deal with having multiples of this card in a deck and having the math get sort of wonky and out of control. This seems like a fun card. You can absolutely double-digit power Picaroons. However, it doesn't do much other than be a big creature. It doesn't have taunt. It's just really a removal stick, a big body to throw at your opponent's battle line and get rid of some of their creatures. Next up we have Relentless Creeper, a 2-power creature that reads, after you choose Dis as your active house, you may return Relentless Creeper from your discard pile to your hand. This activation is going to be forgotten so many times because up until now in Keyforge we haven't really had many activations be active from the discard pile. And this is just going to be a 2-power creature that you'll always be able to play when you call House Dis. It's probably not going to be turning the tide since it's only 2 power, but it's nice to have an extra creature to trade with or even to reap with on board. The next card we're going to look at is Wail of the Damned, an action card with Enhance Capture 1, and the play effect Destroy a creature with no bonus icons. In Mass Mutation, the power of this card is going to be diminished because of all the enhanced icons running around. However, against cards from other sets, where the majority of creatures don't have icons on them except for a small handful, this is just going to be a point and kill card, which is incredibly powerful. The next card we're going to look at is Etan's Jar, an artifact with the play effect Name a Card. Until Etan's Jar leaves play, cards with that name cannot be played. Now in Sealed, this isn't going to do much because it's going to be hard for you to know what your opponent has in their deck. But in Archon, this is incredible. I can think of a ton of situations where you know a certain card or combo is coming. You can completely shut that down by calling Dis and using Etan's Jar. For example, if you decide to go up to 8 or 9 or 10 Aember and you know that your opponent has a too much to protect, you can just use Etan's Jar and say, sorry, you cannot play too much to protect next turn. And your opponent just has to sit there with this card in their hand. They can't even play it for the Aember. They would have to discard it or hold on to it for another turn. This can be potentially devastating in certain situations. Really like the design, very unique design, and overall seems like a fun card to have in your deck. Next up we have Maleficorn, a 5-power creature with 4 enhanced damage icons. And the effect, after an enemy creature is dealt damage by a bonus icon, deal 1 damage to that creature. Now this is going to synergize greatly with the 4 enhance icons that's dealing out with itself. The strength of this card is really going to depend on how many damage icons you have, apart from Maleficorn itself, though 4 is a pretty substantial amount. At 5 power, it's a solid body. I'm not sure if this card will be the greatest or the most powerful, but I think in certain situations its passive ability can definitely turn the tide in some board states. The next card we're going to look at is Painmail, an upgrade with 1 Aember pip that reads, this creature gains, after any player chooses Dis as their active house, put Painmail into its owner's archives and destroy this creature. I think this is an amazing card. Basically, you can put this upgrade on any one of your opponent's creatures, and the next time you call Dis or your opponent calls Dis, that creature is going to be destroyed, and you're going to be able to recycle this card into your archives. If this card happens to land any other enhance icons, then this is going to get out of control if you can keep removing a few of your opponent's creatures, recycling Painmail into your archives, and then playing it again. Being able to destroy any one of your opponent's creatures itself is already a powerful effect. Now this is slow. It's going to take at least 1 turn for you to destroy your opponent's creatures, assuming you call this again and they don't. But the potential to be able to recur this card many times and get the Aember from playing it each time makes this an incredibly impactful and powerful card. Really impressed with this card. I think it's going to be very good. Next up, we have Ritual of Tognath, in action with 3 Aember pips and the play effect, destroy 2 friendly creatures. Now, being able to gain half a key of Aember from a single card is incredible, but I know people are going to immediately compare this to Virtuous Works and to a lesser extent Fertility Chant, and I don't think that's fair. Virtuous Works and Fertility Chant are both first set cards, and they're both incredibly powerful, problematic cards in those sets. Being able to gain so much Aember without any real drawback is just insane. I think Ritual of Tognath addresses this issue well, because you're still getting the amount of Aember, but there's that cost to play. Destroying 2 friendly creatures is fairly substantial. However, within this itself, Ritual of Tognath still plays well because you have the possibility of triggering any of your beneficial destroyed effects in this. So overall, I really like the flavor of this card, and I think it's a much more balanced take on these 2 incredibly impactful cards. The next card we have is Skixuno, a 1-power creature with Omega, which means that your turn will end after playing this card, and the play effect, destroy each other creature. For each creature destroyed this way, give Skixuno a +1 power counter. This card is very similar to Unlocked Gateway, which was another Omega board wipe. The problem with playing Unlocked Gateway, since it was an Omega, the board would most likely be clear, but your opponent always had the first opportunity to drop creatures on board, which completely ruined the tempo and momentum for you. Skixuno solves this problem by giving you a potentially very powerful creature to stay on board that your opponent's going to have to immediately deal with. I think this was a creative way to address the issues with Unlocked Gateway, and I think it's a well-designed card. Overall, really impressed with this card, and this is going to be a very good board wipe in the set. Next, we have the Pale Star, which is an artifact with the Omni ability, destroy the Pale Star. For the remainder of the turn, each creature is considered to have 1 power and 0 armor. Right off the bat, most notably, I can think of this card pairing really well with the Dark Minion, with that destroyed effect of dealing 1 damage to each enemy creature. Basically turns the Dark Minion into a board wipe. It also makes your enemy's minions susceptible to damage enhance icons, because now all of a sudden the 1 power is going to be able to pick off anything there. Now, your creatures are also going to have 1 power and 0 armor as well, but that might make it easier to trade your creatures into your enemies and activate their destroyed effects as well. This is also Omni, which also gives you the flexibility of using it on other turns, which is really nice if you can combo this with a card or ability that does 1 or 2 damage to your enemy's entire board. You can turn those cards in combination with this into a clear board wipe. An interesting and well-designed card. The next card we have is Turnkey, a 2-power creature with the play effect, unforge an opponent's key. If you do, when Turnkey leaves play, your opponent forges a key at no cost. Really interesting that this continues to take this unique approach to Aember control. Unforging a key is incredibly powerful because it sets your opponent obviously back 1 full key. However, I don't think this card is going to be very impactful in general. 2 power is not very fortuitous at all, so it's going to be really easy for your opponent to probably kill Turnkey and get their unforged key back. It also forges as soon as Turnkey dies, which means that on your opponent's next turn, they could just kill Turnkey and reforge their potential 3rd key and win the game. I don't see any exploits with Turnkey where you can unforge the key and then have something happen to Turnkey, whether it's being purged or shuffled into your deck or something, and your opponent would not get their key back, because it says when Turnkey leaves play. So I think Fantasy Flight did a good job of covering their bases there. Overall, this is a really cool design and I really like it, but I don't think it's going to be a good or impactful card, unfortunately. Next up, we have Desire, a 3-power creature that reads keys cost +4. It also has a reap effect, forge a key at current cost, reduced by 1 amber for each friendly sin creature. Now, what is a sin creature? The 7 deadly sins are a set of procedurally generated cards that have a chance to be found within your dishouse in a Mass Mutation deck. Think of them as the 4 horsemen of Mass Mutation Dis. When these cards are generated within your deck, you have a chance of getting anywhere from 3 of the 7 sins to all 7 of them. So their power and effect is really going to vary based on how many of the other sins you have within your deck. For example, in this case, keys costing +4 is going to mean you're going to need to have at least 4 sins within your deck, and on board in this case, to forge a key at cost. So with a deck that only has 3 sins, Desire doesn't seem that great. Whereas in a deck with all 7 of the sins, the power of Desire becomes that much stronger. In general, I think this is one of the weaker sins. Keys costing +4 for both players is a good amount of Amber control. However, at 3 power, it's going to be hard to keep this on board for very long. And it's reliant on being on board with its other sins in order to get that effect. So overall, one of the weaker of the 7 sins. The second sin is Envy, a 3-power creature with Elusive, and the reap effect, if there are 2 or more friendly sin creatures, capture all of your opponent's amber. Being able to capture all of your opponent's amber, incredibly powerful. It is on a reap effect, so it's going to be a little bit slow since it's going to need a turn to ready. And at 3 power, it's probably not going to be living for very long, even though it does have Elusive. If you can keep this on board and protect it and maintain it, then it can be absolutely punishing with its reap effect. Next card is Gluttony, a 6-power creature with the play effect Exalt Gluttony once for each friendly sin creature. And it has the reap effect, move each amber from friendly creatures to your pool. Each friendly creature from all your cards on board, all of your captured amber, all of your exalted amber is going to go into your pool. First of all, just taking the amber put on Gluttony would be pretty impactful as it is. Being able to potentially take amber from Envy like we just saw, or from Snarette, or from any of your other cards that can capture, and putting it into your pool can lead to some huge amber swings. At 6 power, this card is strong. It's going to be staying around for a turn or 2 at least. So if your deck has the tools to capture and put amber on your creatures, then Gluttony is going to be incredibly impactful in your games. The fourth sin is Greed, a 4-power creature that reads, during your draw card step, refill your hand to 1 additional card for each friendly sin creature. This counts Greed itself, so no matter when you play Greed, it's always going to have an impact. And I think that this makes it one of the better sin cards. It's not reliant on having any other sins on board. If it does, that's great. It's going to increase your maximum hand size greatly. If you had all 7 sins on your board, then your hand size would be a total of 13, which is insane. Regardless, 4 power is solid, and it has a great effect that doesn't rely on other sin cards being in play necessarily, which makes this, again, one of the more impactful sin cards in my opinion. The fifth sin is Pride, a 4-power creature that has the reap effect, ward each friendly sin creature. Potentially powerful, but again varies on how many of the sin cards you have. With 3, depending on which other 2 sins you have in your deck, it might not be too strong. However, being able to threaten to reap and ward 3 creatures, if they're all on board or up to 7, can be powerful in itself. Expect Pride to be targeted down by opponents if they see that you have a few other sins on board. The sixth sin is Sloth, a 5-power creature that reads at the end of your turn, if you did not use any creatures this turn, gain 1 Aember for each friendly Sin creature. I think Sloth is going to be most impactful when you don't have any disc creatures already on board. Because remember, playing a creature does not count as using a creature. So if you have a board with no discs, and you play out all your discards, which might include 2 or 3 Sin cards, including Sloth, you're going to be gaining Aember from cards that you weren't able to even use on that turn anyways. Later on in the game, it's probably not going to be worth it to stop using your Sin creatures to gain the Aember from Sloth, since, as we've seen, there's a lot of potentially powerful effects on those creatures. So this is usually going to be a one-time Aember gain. The 7th and final Sin that we have is Wrath, a 3-power, 3-armor creature with Taunt, Poison, and Skirmish, with the fight effect for each friendly Sin creature enrage an enemy creature. You could take out the fight effect altogether, and I think this would still be a powerful card. Having both Poison and Skirmish together means that anything that Wrath fights is most likely going to die, assuming it doesn't have 3 or more armor. Having Taunt means that your opponents are going to have to throw stuff at Wrath to kill it, potentially destroying more of their creatures. Basically, Wrath trades incredibly well, and it does its job as serving as protector of your other discs and other Sins creatures. Very strong, and I think anyone would be happy to see Wrath within their 7 Sins deck list. Finally, we're going to be taking a look at the Hybrid House discards. In Mass Mutation, there are creatures that take elements from 2 out of the 7 houses and have them combined together into one card. You can tell which houses that a creature is from based on their names. They are labeled consistently, so it's easier for us to tell. Any one of these hybrid cards found in House Dis would have the ending Fiend, whereas if one of these discards was found in another house, it would have the prefix Demo. So either one of these cards with either the suffix Fiend or the prefix Demo has the trait of a discard. For Logos, their prefix is Techno, and their suffix is Bot. So this card, both these cards, are combinations of House Dis and House Logos. The Dis trait that all hybrid house cards with Dis have is -1 power, and the effect Destroyed Steal 1, which I think is one of the more powerful effects out there. Fits well with their theme, this set, which seems to be a lot of destroyed effects, and Steal 1 on a creature is really nice to have. Overall, I think it's going to be one of the more powerful house hybrid cards out there. So let's summarize Dis and Mass Mutation and talk about what their house is all about. First of all, they have a lot of destroyed effects. This is going to make it really awkward for opponents to fight into because they don't want to trigger those effects. And it's also going to feel good for players who have Dis houses to fight into their opponent's creatures because they don't mind triggering those destroyed effects. They also have a lot of enhanced damage icons on their cards, which means that they're going to be able to slowly whittle down their opponent's board in order to trade better or more efficiently with their own cards. They also have a unique trait of unforging keys, which we haven't seen too much up until now. It's probably not going to be the most powerful mechanic, but it is unique and gives a nice flavor to the house in general. And finally, we're seeing a lot of balanced versions of legacy cards, which I think is a healthy direction for the game to be going in. Hopefully this becomes a trend in the other houses that we go over in the set as well. This concludes our review of the new discards we're going to be seeing in Mass Mutation. Which cards are you most excited for? Which ones do you think I overestimated or underestimated? Let me know in the comments below. Join us next time when we're going to be taking a look at House Logos and the new cards that they're going to be featuring in Mass Mutation. Until then, take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.